So this is a fantastic group, as I will keep drawing attention to, because I don't see many audiences where you've got world-class corporates, you've got entrepreneurs, you've got investors, you've got policymakers, we've got colleagues from the government here, the Bank of England here, we've got founders of billion-dollar companies, we've got the scientists, the researchers all together connecting with each other. And that's why it's very appropriate. Our next conversation is going to talk about how we take things right from the lab to the launch. And in the chair is going to be the brilliant Chief Executive of London & Partners. But why don't we welcome out? I'll call everyone out. Please take your seats and we'll get cracking, because we've only got limited time for these conversations. So in the chair, the Chief Executive of London & Partners, Laura Citron, joined by Dr. Anne Lane from UCLB, Megan Kelley, Head of Research at FCAT, and Dr. Riam Kanso, the CEO of Conception X. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Hey, Megan. All right.
Thank you so much, Ollie, and delighted to have this panel with me today, because as you've heard from Ollie, London is very focused on frontier innovation, and we've made it one of the priorities of our 10-year growth plan. And we've chosen that term very deliberately to distinguish frontier innovation from broader digital and technology, because London has done brilliantly in tech in the last 20 years, but we've been largely an innovation taker. We've been very, very good at adopting 4 major technologies: cloud, internet, mobile, and blockchain, that were developed in the US. And our ambition now for London and for the UK for the next wave is to be innovation makers. And that's why for us, frontier innovation is the term we use to describe that commercialization of breakthrough research and development in AI, in quantum, in robotics, in materials, in bioengineering, and how we apply that across life sciences and deep tech. And so much of that starts with our universities. And that's why I'm delighted to have this panel with us today to really dig into the role of universities and how we support entrepreneurs to spin out from universities. So, to get us started, I'm going to ask each of you, what is the single change that, in your view, would best unlock our ability to turn research into global companies? And I'm going to start with you, Riam, as CEO of Conception X. Your whole business is supporting the best scientists to start deep tech companies. So what for you is the biggest single change?
So thank you, and good morning, everyone. At Conception X, we really believe that the next decades and our future on this planet as people and our health relies in an asymmetrical way and in an unprecedented way on the early career researchers that exist in the leading universities that we have in London and in the UK. There's a lot of power and privilege and responsibility right now during this time to be a deep expert in a scientific field. So who these people work with to commercialize their tech and make it manifest in the world, the alliances they have, who they take money from, and who they basically form alliances with hasn't been as important as is now ever. So if we're talking about one change, this is the era of the scientific founder. The startup world is not necessarily built for scientists who want to lead companies. They think in different ways. The kind of archetype that's being pushed is not necessarily for the one who's going to lead kind of the next few decades. So the change is to actually start accepting that we're going to have a new type of founder. This is what we call at Conception X, the venture scientist, and how they're supported, how they're funded should work in that way. So the change should be to deviate from like the classical way that startups are pushed and built and motivated, etc., to make space for this. And it requires new types of funding and new types of support as well.
The venture scientist, I love that concept. Thank you, Riam. Anne, you're CEO of UCL Business, which is the tech transfer business of UCL. And in the time you've led it, I think your businesses have raised $3 billion. You've had like 5 NASDAQ spin-outs. It's a great success story. What for you is the single biggest change that would help you to turn your science into multi-billion-dollar companies?
No, thanks, and thanks for inviting me onto the panel. I mean, actually, I go one step back from something that Riam said, because the biggest change, and I'd like to see it continuing and not just at UCL, is when you have an academic, how they're promoted. Because when I first started on the commercial side, 25 years ago now, some people wouldn't even have me in their offices because they didn't think you should commercialise research. And research impact has really made a difference there, because what it's meant, certainly at UCL, is that you can, as part of your promotion process as an academic, a patent granted would actually count towards that. And activity and entrepreneurship would count towards your promotion. And I think it's not seen now as you're not a proper scientist if you're also commercialising. Actually, that's what people want to see. And whereas we used to have to go out to get that innovation in, now we're having people knocking on our doors. So I think it's already started, but I'd like to see that keep going. That was the single best change, was to actually change the academic career pathway. Not to say you shouldn't still have blue skies research, because you absolutely should. You don't get innovation without blue skies research. But actually having that option and that ability for people to not have to choose between one or the other, but that they can do both. And then actually that's a sort of virtuous circle, because then you get degrees that are seen as having a commercial stamp, like a degree from MIT would be. Even if you didn't do anything commercial, MIT is seen as somewhere very commercial. So I think that's the step change that has made a difference, and I think it will continue to make a difference.
Really interested that both of your answers are about our venture scientists as individuals and what motivates and incentivizes them. Neither of you have gone for big systemic things. So I think that's really interesting, and we'll come back to that later today about the entrepreneur as a human individual. Megan, you lead the research team at the Fidelity Centre for Applied Technologies. So you are looking 3, 5 and more years out at the research that's coming through and what that's going to mean for your business. So you bring that corporate venture perspective. What do you see, and you're based in Boston, which is obviously the heart of commercializing research. What do you see as the single biggest change that we could make here?
You know, I think that fora like this and helping people understand and have conversations around these breakthrough technologies and kind of be open to imagining, but also discussing implications and possible use cases and opportunities in a more collegial and building way together. I mean, I'm biased. I think the collaboration partnerships are a wonderful way to do that, right? But even hearing from the presenter earlier with Katie saying she's met a cohort, you know, we just continuing to foster these cohorts and collaborative networks, I think is a huge way to leverage the physical knowledge graphs and the, you know, kind of intellectual knowledge graphs in very powerful ways.
Brilliant, thank you. So, Riam, let's dig a bit more into this idea of the venture scientist. What do we need to do to help scientists to take that center stage? And is that always the right thing to do? How do we judge when it's best to pair a really successful scientist with an experienced entrepreneur, or when should a scientist be an entrepreneur themselves?
I think this is really important. It's not everyone's life path. Like, some people should go and build companies. Others will have a very fulfilling career and a very important one doing research, and others will go work for other organizations. But the important thing is to give these really, really smart people an opportunity to try this path and give them the right resources to do it without the type of consequences that would be detrimental. For example, at ConceptionX, we recruit 100 teams a year. And what we do is that we keep them in their research degrees and in their universities so that they can explore this pathway to see if they want to become venture scientists, if this is good for them, and if this is something that can be backed by other people. And it's a great learning opportunity. If this works for them, and if it's good for their own life path as individuals, they can go on and build companies without the consequences that sometimes are put on them, where you have to quit your PhD to try this stupid 3-month thing where someone will decide on a whim if they fund you or not. This is extremely detrimental. This is not hustle culture, and this has broken bonds. The research institutions that we have in the UK are the incubators. They have labs, they have equipment, they have spectrometers, they have like genetic, sequencing machines. You don't just quit and you go to your parents' garage and like write the whole thing on a laptop. This is not what's happening here. So it's important to build a safe infrastructure for people to do this and encourage them. And like the last step that we've added as ConceptionX in the last year was, because we're a nonprofit, so we got together a group of science angels, people who have done this before and know how painful it is to fund the next generation of founders. So the way they make decisions is different. And I think the whole ecosystem needs to kind of shift a little bit and allow ways of building companies that are different than what we've seen today. So you can see that I feel really strongly about this.
It's fascinating, and I think really speaks to that difference between why starting a frontier business is completely different to starting, say, a SaaS business. And we have to all understand that those differences and support those entrepreneurs.
And it takes longer, and it needs a lot of people, and it needs collaboration, and it needs a lot of money, and it needs grants. You don't just, quit on a whim, right?
Anne, you've been at this for a long time. You haven't quit on a whim. Tell us from your perspective. You did? Oh, did you? Oh, tell us that story. Oh, that's for tonight, is it? Okay, over a drink. From you lead one of the biggest tech transfer teams in the UK. From your perspective, what's working well, and where does the UK spin-out system need to improve?
So I think the UK is good at commercialisation. I'll say that off the bat. I know it's a very good narrative to say we're not, but we are. But I think there are two issues at the start of the process and then in terms of scaling up. Proof of concept funding has actually been transformational for us, and we have banged on about it so much that actually the government has now put in a proof of concept scheme. And it's a start, but it's just a start. So 40 million over 5 years for the whole of the UK, which is a start, but it's not going to get you where you need to be. I mean, we're lucky at UCL, we're able to retain our profits, reinvest them, so we've got our own proof of concept fund of around 7 million, but even that's not for a university like UCL. And you compare that to somewhere like Leuven, University of Leuven, they have 20 million euros a year just for that one university for proof of concept funding. So that's the sort of difference in scale. And then at the other end, in terms of scale up, Series A funding for our spin-outs, we find not easy to get, but it's there. You go beyond that, it becomes very, very hard. And, we have our NASDAQ IPOs, and it would be good to have seen those IPOs in the UK. I don't think it's necessarily a disadvantage that they've listed in the US, because it shows the quality of UK research. That US investors will put their money behind it, and it shows the global impact of UK research. But I think it's those two bits of financing. The translational research funding is there, but that's a step before proof of concept. And I think you need those two things.
Really interesting. And to your last point on scale-up funding, we've actually got a conversation a bit later this morning, very specifically looking at whether our capital markets are fit for supporting frontier innovation businesses. Megan, you sit in Boston and you have a very global view on how research turns into massive businesses. Can you give us a sense of how you see the UK compete and what we can do, in your view, to really stay at the forefront in this space?
So, I think that really building on your proof of concept point, that's something we do a lot of inside FCAT and Fidelity, but I think we all need to recognize that there is an urgency to this, particularly now, but the more proofs of concepts, the more storytelling that we're doing, and recognizing the fact that companies and startups can now be formed even more quickly. It's not just access to information now, it's the access to the ability to build and test very quickly, and I know it's different in a university setting, but this compression of discovery time, as you were mentioning as well earlier in a conversation, and then compression of company formation even. So there's a very fast pace that's coming at us, and the ability to discover ideas from around the world, not even just the UK or just the US. There's so much going on, and we have to have more awareness and experimentation at a very fast pace at this point. So I'd say more and more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan. And you and the team at FCAT are huge supporters of the innovation ecosystem in London, so thank you for everything that you're doing. Questions. I now have my phone, with thanks to Janet. So if you've got questions for our wonderful panel, please pop them on Slido and I shall have a look. We've probably got time for 1, 2, Kiana? I'm getting the eye. So, great question. How can we convince more academics to become founders? I feel like this is something that Riam and Anne, you in particular, have spent a lot of time on. What do you think is the biggest objection that you hear? Why do people not do it?
I think there's a lot of mystery about what it means to be a founder to a lot of academics, and I think, when they're shown that this is something that's coachable, if they have the right disposition for it, more of them join. But just kind of on a very quick note, at ConceptionX, 37% of our founders are women, and they're deep tech scientists who have launched companies. And I think the trick there is, all that data about women only applying to a job if they fit all of the essential criteria, whereas men do it. I think when entrepreneurship is described as, a venture science opportunity, which is educational, where you can try and, you can experiment with that, more people will go for it when there are fewer consequences and backlash if they fail. And obviously when more people try, more of them succeed. So
de-risking.
De-risking some of the career pathways, because not everybody can do that.
Great, thank you. And Anne, what do you think?
Well, I think partly it's how much they've got on their plate very often. They want their research to make an impact, but very often they're teaching, they're trying to run a lab, they're trying to get research funding to continue with that. And the university funding model does not encourage it, because universities are hit at one end by every grant that they get from the research councils. They subsidise by 20%. And at the other end, they have a 6% fee on international student fees. So they have to bring in more and more students to teach, more and more pressure on academics. Something needs to give there, I think, just to give people the time to do it. And particularly in women, we see very few women CEOs of our spinouts who were scientists. Very few women CEOs, full stop, actually, but that's another whole debate that's not for this panel, I don't think. And very often they're dealing with either with childcare or carer responsibilities, and that's very hard. If you go on maternity cover and you have a grant, tough. It's not flexible. So I think there's a number of ways that you can encourage that, but fundamentally I think that university funding model is a problem.
May I chime in just with the added emphasis on the fact, and we talked a lot about this at the retreat, the spirit of curiosity, right? And if a scientist is not the most curious I can imagine, that fits the entrepreneur model. And that's where we find successful startup founders, is because they're driven by a curiosity and a passion. And it's just a perfect combination. So I think the more examples and acknowledging the curiosity as a driving force is very exciting.
Fantastic, thank you. So we really need to, from what I take from this conversation, we need to be redesigning our systems around our venture scientists as individuals, so that the pathways work for them as humans, so that they can really commit to becoming entrepreneurs. Well, Riam and Megan, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Can we have a big round of applause, please, for our panel?